where we have 3 papers on names in European countries, namely Spain, Germany, and Bulgaria. And as Jane already said, our first presenter is Carmen Fernandez Juncal from the University of Salamanca. And the title of her paper is Gender Distinction in European Spanish Anthroponyms. So try to share your screen, Carmen.
Yes, I'm trying to open it, but now I think. Sorry. I'm not used to use Teams, so.
First, you need to have it open, and then you press the share button, and it should let you share.
Share, but what? Oh, now, I think.
Okay, wonderful. We can see it.
You can see?
Yes.
Yes. Well, but I cannot see it. I'm going to put it up. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
So I'm beginning. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers of this meeting for giving us the opportunity to share our work on this topic. What I am about to present is a summary of the article I had prepared on the subject, so I will not dwell on details that I will develop in the final text. A given name, a first name, a forename, tends to be one of the main indicators of a person's gender. It is not always a straightforward process, as there are names that can be applied regardless of gender identity. The main purpose of anthroponyms, namely a person's identification, is not a trifling matter and extends to a name. I can see myself twice. Well, I can listen to it. Not only from a personal perspective, but also as an accepted expression of the categories that structure our societies, among which gender is one of the most prevalent. Spanish speakers find it easy to match a person's given name to the gender according to the customary use of anthroponyms. It is accepted that Inés is a female name and Luis applies to a male, although there is nothing in their structure that justifies this conclusion. However, new names may now raise doubts, as opposed to other languages that have more defined rules. All nouns in Spanish, whether common or personal, have a grammatical gender, with an array of different procedures for signaling it. Firstly, and as occurs in other Romance languages, the variation or change in the ending helps to identify an individual, as in such male-female parents as Antonio, Antonia. Secondly, there are heteronyms, etymologically paired names, that are not perceived as opposites through their variations. Such is the case of José, Josefa.
Carmen, I am sorry to interrupt you, but are you turning the slides? Because I can see the same slide all the time.
Oh, no, I'm turning. I'm turning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we can see the third slide, yes.
Oh, okay, so I leave it this way, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, there are anthroponyms that are solely masculine or feminine, as occurs with the male names Matías and Oscar and the female ones Beatriz, Matilde. Finally, there are the so-called nomina communia, those names that may be both masculine and feminine, Amparo, Cruz, whereby the person's gender may be deduced solely by the context or by qualifying terms like pronouns or adjectives. This last type of name, as we shall see in due course, has been feminized and is now rarely used for males except in certain parts of Latin America. These procedures may include a further one, namely the addition of Maria, which is also used to feminize strictly masculine names, Maria José and Maria Jesús. Besides these morphological markers, there are others of a structural nature that will be described further. but we should not overlook other manifestations of gender distinction, which we can frame within the differentiated attributive patterns in place for males and females. Suffice to say here that the most common patterns in the former case are linked to tradition and heritage, whereas the latter are governed by other principles such as originality, fashion, and uniqueness. We therefore contend that is the conflation of both these perspectives, one of more formal nature and the other following more social guidelines, which informs the gender distinction of names in the Spanish spoken in Spain, as the variation spoken in Latin America apply other parameters of influences and tendencies. We will conduct an analysis of both aspects based on prior studies, seeking to encapsulate the factors that explain the current situation in European Spanish. Our findings here are based on numerous sources. Firstly, we use available data provided by the Spain's National Institute of Statistics, as they encompass Spain's entire present population and enable us to detect the variation across the different timeframes studied. In addition to these primary sources of a comprehensive nature, there is another complementary resource, the list of available given names gathered through a survey. As you will know, the available lexicon is the sum of words that speakers can recall and whose use is conditioned by the specific matter of communication. In this case, the subject was male names and female names. In addition to these sources, we have accessed data gathered for an as yet unpublished study on the so-called onomastic narrative. In socionomastic terms, we are transplanting the array of resources used in what is referred to as folk onomastics or popular metonymic discourse. And finally, we have the service conducted by Vinagre Vázquez in a very recent study supervised by myself, and the processes of self-attribution in the trans and non-binary community. Besides gathering information on the new names, the study has used an onomastic narrative according to the model already described. Well, we have used many different kind of statistics that I'm not explaining now. An initial step involves measuring the length of the anthroponyms, phonemes and syllables, which has evolved in step in both repertoires towards a reduction of the phonic corpus of both phonemes and syllables, especially over the past 3 decades. This tendency may be due to the decline in the use of compound names, especially those involving the name Maria. The graph plots the progress through the two catalogs' convergence over the last decade, which suggests that we are now dealing with a significant parameter in gender distinction. The patterns of accenting and anthroponyms are also similar among males and females, whereby, and as is only to be expected in Spanish, there are numerous paroxytons in both cases. There is nevertheless a marked difference. Females have recorded a gradual decrease in acute anthroponyms, whereas they have remained almost steady among males. Thirdly, we study an aspect that appears to be of greater importance, namely the termination of names. As mentioned earlier, Spanish generally has cases of male-female variation, Antonio, Antonia, although in principle terminations do not necessarily constitute a gender marker. This means there are female names ending in O, Rocío, and male and female ones ending in a range of consonants, Carlos, Inés, Javier, Pilar, and more rarely, male names ending in A, Borja, and in other vowels in both genders, Jaime, Irene, Araceli. The table presents the corresponding data for the 50 most common names recorded over the past decades. There is a clear process of specialization whereby the termination A disappears from the male repertoire and increases exponentially among females, where it accounts for the majority of cases. In turn, the termination O is clearly linked to the male repertoire, although it has lost some of its popularity in favor of a consonant ending. The male catalogue proves to be more stable than its female counterpart, which has been subject to more changes, as we shall see in the next section. These data are consistent with those compiled through the Survey on Lexical Availability. Closely related to this parameter is another formal trait that supports the feminization of names through the inclusion of a marker associated with the grammatical feminine a. In this case, within the anthroponym, we thus encounter structures in which besides the termination a, there is another identical sound which appears either as a tonic vowel, as in Clara, Ana, Laura, or as in a tonal one, Martina, Carlota. This vowel distribution is extremely common. It appears in 60% of the most common female names over the past decade, in almost 40% of our corpus of available names, and in 57% of the list of names of individuals with an average age under 20. Finally, we have looked for nomina communia in all these corpuses, which were not unusual at other times in Spain and which, as already noted, are still present in other parts of the Spanish-speaking world. This double usage has now completely disappeared, whereby they are used mainly as female names, thus avoiding any gender ambiguity. This movement has been observed in other languages, meaning there are few androgynous names with a short impact time. The names affected lose their popularity instantly and become used solely for one or other gender, mostly for females, who are more likely to receive a male name than males are to receive a female one. This disambiguation process also affects the pairing with gender variation. Our data show that the alternating mechanism has become outdated and the preference is now for names that are not associated with their male or female versions. A preference is therefore found for avoiding possible confusion and more accurately signaling the gender of the name's bearer. This means that Antonio has ousted Antonia, while Julia has done the same to Julio, a situation that has already been reported by other authors. The overall results follow a fairly clear trend. There is a formal divergence between the male and female repertoires through a process of hyperfeminizing girls' names and the disappearance of those features common to both genders, which have shifted to the female catalogue. This is an analogous situation to the one found in other languages, where the movements in onomastic attribution do not follow predetermined and immovable gender patterns, although the system ensures the gender distinction is always upheld. As stated in the introduction, numerous socio-onomastic studies on a range of languages have reported that male names have a more stable format and tend to be more conservative, without being so obviously affected by the innovations, a situation that has been found in a plethora of prior studies. This also means that the female repertoire is expected to be broader and more diverse. This is the origin of a trend that after 50 years continues to be perceptible again in different cultures and languages, including Spain, or even in artificial languages as Esperanto. Family continuity is still linked to male offspring, which means they tend to inherit the father's name or that of some other relative, while the choice for girls usually respond less to a sense of union and family legacy, and more to such criteria as fashion. The male repertoire therefore remains more stable, while the female one is more dynamic. Our data fully ratify these assumptions. We report a general tendency toward dispersion of the repertoire from the 30s till now, with individual names no longer accounting for a significant percentage of the population and the avoidance of overly popular ones. These differences in the attributive patterns of males and females are confirmed by several circumstances. Firstly, we analyze the use of the compound names for males and females. And in Spanish is common practice to have a single given name, although the use of Maria, now in decline but frequent in the past, subverted that propensity. The data therefore indicate that the use of compound names is clearly receded among today's generation for both males and females, but this change is more pronounced in female names. A second aspect that may confirm the tendencies described is that the number of male names that remain on the list of the 50 most common ones triples those of females, which reflects the conservative nature of the former compared to the volatility of the latter. Along these same lines, there is a third value, the nomastic diversity index, which may help us to confirm this distribution. This index is calculated by dividing the number of different names by the number of individuals, which gives a value of 1 if everyone has a different name, and a value close to 0 if everyone shares the same one. This index is especially useful for measuring the size of the catalog of names and the repertoire's dispersion or convergence. The table shows that this index has always been higher for female names in all the studies in which we have applied this index. Well, the sum of onomastic narratives enables us to reach similar conclusions to those specified above. Firstly, the traditional procedure of inheriting a forebear's name is a great deal more common among males. A name is a symbolic asset that is conveyed from one generation to the next. A name's generational transmission has become so ingrained that even its very existence is denied, despite its obvious importance, as you can see in the example in the slide. In turn, as already noted, individual or parental choice when choosing an offspring name is a factor that has a greater bearing among females, who are more susceptible to values such as uniqueness, innovation, and originality. This conclusion is further corroborated by the fact that females seem to be affected more by certain attributive models, such as the adoption of foreign names, celebrity names, the use of so-called transparent names in the form of common nouns as personal ones, Abril, Jade, Lluvia, the use of toponyms as anthroponyms, India, Siena, Ithaca, orthographic variation, and the use of names that were originally hypocoristic or diminutives. This presentation concludes with the findings of a study of self-attribution among transgender and non-binary groups that was supervised by myself. The study needs to be developed in the future. We're still working on it, but it still evidences the trends currently affecting these communities. The nature of the Spanish language, little given to ambiguous or common names, seems to require fairly acute gender distinction in its onomastic repertoire, whereby female and male names tend to be perceived as typically masculine or typically feminine, respectively. Such is the case also of transgender individuals in a position to conduct their own naming process. Following the language's own patterns means that the given names collected are positioned at one or other end of the masculine-feminine spectrum. Speakers quickly identify Alicia or Olivia with female names and Pablo or Angel with male names. In other words, the names chosen are polarized and are evidently feminine or evidently masculine, avoiding ambiguity. This polarization also affects foreign names like Harry or Mark, which are also fairly common in the corpus compiled. In other words, this confirms the premise that this collective also records name-based gender hypercharacterization, although in this case, according to the gender recorded at the time of attribution and not at birth. By contrast, the anthroponyms that non-binary individuals have given themselves are either markedly androgynous or indistinct, like Calais or Mythos. And this follows two pathways: the ex novo creation of new anthroponyms and importing them from other onomastic tradition, that is, from other languages. And with that, I conclude. These are the references. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carmen, for your presentation. Also, thank you for keeping the time so well.
Oh.
So I will now ask you to stop sharing the presentation. Yes.
Yes.
And as Jane suggested, we will have our discussion after the 3 presentations. So now I will ask our second presenter, Anna Maria Balbach from the University of Münster. And the title of her talk is Given Names and Gender, an initial comparison between Germany and other European countries. And we can already see there.
Hello, everybody. Do you see my screen, my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to present to you my research on given names and gender, an initial comparison between Germany and other European countries. As Alfred has noted, given names reveal much about the societies and cultures that use them. He found that 85% of the societies he studied considered a person's gender important enough to include in the name. Surprisingly, it is only recently that Germany and other European countries have begun to study how names relate to gender. Using these studies, as well as my own research, I will talk to you today about these connections and developments. Let's get right into it. Emilia, Sophia, Noah, and Matteo have been the most popular baby names in Germany for years, and they show that there are given names that are particularly popular. At the same time, these name statistics also show that the frequency of these popular names has been declining for years.
I'm sorry, Maria. Again, you also are not you're not sharing the slides. Can you try to move them?
Oh, it's just my title at the moment.
You see, you're still on the first. Oh, okay,
yes,
okay.
Yes,
I'm sorry. I apologize. I just wanted to make sure. Sorry.
No problem. Okay. So I will start again with this. At the same time, these name statistics also show that the frequency of these popular names has been declining for years. The reason is that names are becoming more diverse because most parents are looking for a very individual name for their offspring. What is striking, though, is that there is one onymic boundary that Germans almost never cross, the boundary between boys' and girls' names. German name law plays an important role here. It does not allow boys' names for girls and girls' names for boys. However, it has been possible to choose gender-neutral names for 26 years. Initially, German registry offices required that each child with a gender-neutral name be given a second gender-specific name. Since 2007, this is no longer necessary, and a gender-neutral name can also be given as the only name. Nevertheless, this option is hardly used by German parents. I would like to take a closer look at the actual numbers in the following. To that end, Schmuck's study looked at the gender-neutral names among Germany's top 1,000 names in 2014 and identified 18 names given to both genders. It turns out that only 3% of all newborns received one of these gender-neutral names. On further analysis, she found that the numbers were even lower, as only 3 names were actually given to boys and girls in a balanced way. All of the other 15 names showed some degree of dominance as either girls' or boys' names. I've visualized the distribution for you on the slide. You can see how seldom names are given in a balanced way. Most names are boys' names that are also given to girls. German parents did not seem to like gender-neutral names 9 years ago. But what about today? Has anything changed? To find out, I compared the top 1,000 given names in 2017, 2020, and 2022. I analyzed the names given to both genders using Schmuck's model. The results show that gender-neutral names are still a fringe phenomenon in Germany. You can see that the proportion of children with gender-neutral names increased only slightly from 2014 to 2022. As in Schmuck's data from 2014, I found that even fewer names are actually assigned in a balanced way in the following years. The figure shows the intermixing for 2022. Only 2 names, Janne and Esra, are gender balanced, while most of the gender neutral names are again boys' names. In Schmuck's and other studies, it has proven useful to apply a degree of mixing of at least 10% and a frequency threshold of at least 0.05% within a birth cohort, and to define only names that meet these criteria as gender neutral. The background is that names must also have a certain degree of recognition within a society in order to be perceived as a boys, girls, or gender neutral name. Taking into account the frequency threshold and minimum mixing, only 3 gender neutral names remain for 2022. I will refer to these names as gender neutral names in the strict sense. By gender neutral names in the broader sense, I mean all names that overlap in the top 1,000 names for boys and girls, and thus basically occur to some degree as names for both genders. This classification makes it clear that most of the gender neutral names in the strict sense have only a low degree of mixing. We see significantly higher degrees of mixing for names in the low frequency range. To verify this, I calculated the gender neutrality index for each name according to Blothoft. This index is calculated based on the name records and indicates on a scale of 0 to 1 how gender neutral a name is. An index of 0 indicates a gender-specific assignment. An index of 1 indicates a completely balanced assignment. I have combined this index with the frequency within the birth cohort for each name and displayed it graphically. You can clearly see that in all 4 years, the names with a high gender neutrality index are only found in the low frequency range. The more often a name is assigned, the more gender-specific it is. Next, I looked at the linguistic origins of the gender-neutral names in the broad sense. The analysis revealed that the names are very international. But the figure also shows that the donor languages change over time. In 2014, for example, gender-neutral names are of Anglo-American, Russian, Hebrew, and Italian origin. Names of Russian origin decrease over time and disappear by 2022. Arabic Turkish, on the other hand, rose from just 5% in 2014 to over 30% in 2022, making up the majority of gender-neutral names. This shows how strongly names also reflect current socio-political developments. Finally, I would like to take a look at the spellings. More than 50% of the German gender-neutral names in the broad sense show spelling variants. It turns out that a large part of the spelling variants are actually gender-specific spellings for the gender-neutral names. In 2022, 82% of the spelling variants indicate the gender. In other words, a large proportion of gender-neutral names in Germany sound the same but allow gender assignment via the spelling. The question is whether gender-neutral names behave in this way only in Germany, or whether there are similar tendencies in other countries as well. I have therefore examined some of the points for the same period for the names in the Netherlands, Denmark, France, England, Norway, and the US. Gender-neutral names are used even less in Denmark than in Germany, and almost not at all in Norway. France, England, the Netherlands, and the US all use more gender-neutral names. While the difference with England and France may seem small at first glance, by 2022, there are 40% more children with gender-neutral names in England and even 60% more in France than in Germany. The difference to the Netherlands is already clear in the graph. In all years, there are about twice as many names as in Germany. This is only topped by the US, which has the most gender-neutral names of all countries. If we look only at gender-neutral names in the strict sense, the number of names decreases in all countries as expected, but not at the same extent. While France and England were close before, the gap has now widened because France has significantly more gender-neutral names in the strict sense. The most obvious change is in the US and the Netherlands. In the US, gender-neutral names in the strict sense decrease by 2020 and 2022. In the Netherlands, in contrast, they have increased by 50% in those years. The Netherlands is therefore the country with the most gender-neutral names in 2020 and 2022. After that, I took a closer look at the degree of intermixing in each country to see if boys' names were also predominantly given as gender-neutral names, as was the case in Germany. The situation is very similar in France and England. Again, more boys' names are given to girls than vice versa. This is the case in all 4 years studied. In Denmark, we see the same thing, even more though. Here, 2022 is the first year that boys' names are not exclusively used as gender-neutral names. In the US, this distribution is not as pronounced, and we see that it becomes more and more balanced from 2014 to 2022. We see the same in the Netherlands. Boys' and girls' names are used almost equally as sources for gender-neutral names in all time periods. Then I calculated the gender neutrality index according to Blothoft for all gender-neutral names from the different countries and again combined it with the frequency in the birth cohort. In most countries, balanced gender-neutral names are found only in the low frequency range, similar to Germany. For each country, however, it is possible to determine a slightly different frequency threshold, or one could say tolerance threshold, above which the names become less gender-neutral. In addition to the country-specific threshold, it can be observed that some countries also have country-specific outliers. Such outliers are names that are frequently assigned and still have a high gender neutrality index. This is particularly the case in France and the Netherlands. These are names that either already have a long country-specific tradition as gender-neutral names, such as Camille in France, or that have established a gender-specific spelling. For example, in France, the name Andrea is spelled with an accent for girls and without an accent for boys. The English name Charlie is spelled with IE exclusively for women, with Y predominantly for men. The same is true for the outlier Noah in the Netherlands. It also has a gender-specific spelling with H for boys and one without H for girls. These gender-specific spellings, thus, seem to be one reason why the names appear with a balanced distribution for boys and girls even in the higher frequency range. Despite the country-specific outliers, however, we see that gender-neutral names tend to play a minor role in naming in all 7 countries studied. This leads me to the question of how gender can be marked in names at all, and whether there are ways other than gender-neutral names that a society can use to express its desire for less gendered naming. Let's take a quick look at how gender can be marked in names. There are 3 different principles. First, you can express gender through semantics, creating so-called speaking names. Examples of this are the old Germanic names, as well as the names in Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, and Turkish. Here, gender is usually assigned through gender stereotypes. Second, gender can be indicated formally, for example, by certain endings on the body of the name. Italian uses this principle. Women's names almost always end in A, and men's names mostly in O. Many other European languages also use this formal principle, for example, to derive a female name from a male name. The third and final principle is the conventional principle. This is the most common throughout the world. Here, gender cannot be recognized semantically or formally, but must be learned as part of cultural knowledge. In German, the conventional principle is most commonly used today. Some names also use the formal principle. But that was not always the case. In the history of German language, the Germanic name inventory was first semantically motivated. Over the centuries, a name inventory of a conventional and formal nature developed. Around the 10th century, however, the formal principle began to disappear. On the way from Old High German to Middle High German, the so-called reduction of unstressed syllables took place. That is, all unstressed full vowels were weakened to the schwach sound. As a result, all name endings that had previously indicated gender were also changed to the uniform sound. Then something happened that is considered a linguistic sensation in the history of German. The phonological gender boundary of given names was repaired, presumably following the Latin model, by restoring unstressed full vowels exclusively in given names and not in appellatives. Names like Otte and Eve became Otto and Eva, and the gender assignment via the ending was restored. This also explains why, to this day, German names ending in O have a masculine connotation and names ending in A feminine one. In addition, many girls' names in German are derived from boys' names by adding A, and many originate from other languages. As a result, they are longer and have a different stress than boys' names. This is how it happens that in today's German, we not only have two separate sets of names for man and woman, but that these sets of names also have different linguistic characteristics. Women's names are mostly non-initially stressed, longer than men's names, and end in a vowel. Men's names, on the other hand, tend to be shorter, stressed on the first syllable, and end in consonants. See the table for the concrete numbers. Nübling has conducted a diachronic analysis of the names. She found that the difference in linguistic structure was significantly greater 65 years ago and have flattened out over the decades. Her study of names from 1945 to 2015 showed that girls' names have become shorter over time, with more emphasis on the first syllable. Boys' names, in contrast, are getting longer and containing more vowels. Since the turn of the millennium, more boys' names have the typically feminine ending A. This implies that since opposite gender names are not allowed in Germany and gender-neutral names are not very popular, a trend is developing that is breaking down the strict onymic gender segregation in another way. This trend is in line with social changes in post-war Germany, where traditional gender roles are also changing. Nübling refers to this as the similarization of female and male names, resulting in an onymic degendering behind the scenes through their phonetic components. Looking at the current top name lists in other countries, it seems that the phonetic convergence of boys' and girls' names is not happening exclusively in Germany. To verify this impression, I transcribed and compared the top 100 boys and girls names from 2014 and 2022 for Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, England, and France. It turns out that in all 5 countries, boys' names have adapted phonetically to girls' names from 2014 to 2022. Of course, these observations need to be studied in more detail and over a longer period of time. However, we can take these findings as a first indication that in Germany and apparently in other countries as well, given names are becoming phonologically similar. This is another way beyond gender-neutral names of reducing gender markers. An international research group on onomastics would be crucial to advance this and other research together. I initiated such a group some time ago. If any of you would like to join, please send me an email. And now, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, for an interesting presentation.
You're very welcome.
So, and now let's move to our last presenter in this panel, Maja Vlachova-Angelová from Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. And the title of her talk is Gender-Neutral Names, a Boundary Phenomenon in the Bulgarian Anthroponomasticon. So the floor is yours, Maja.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here today and to participate in this event. Let me just share my screen. I hope it's going to be okay. Well, I think it's share. Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Well, so you see it full screen or?
Yeah, I think it's as the other presentations, yes.
Okay. This is the title of my research, Gender Neutral Names, a Boundary Phenomenon in the Bulgarian Anthroponomasticon. I started my observations on this topic 2 or 3 years ago under a project that we have been conducting for some time, and we are finishing this November, so this symposium is very well timed, and I can present my research. The main purpose of my research on gender-neutral names can be summarized to the following: to shed light on gender-neutral names as a boundary phenomenon in the Bulgarian Anthroponomasticon by answering the following questions. How transitions in gender coding of forenames facilitate the appearance of gender ambiguous names in the Bulgarian context? What are the linguistic expressions of the degendering of forenames on morphological and phonological level? When did gender-neutral names appear in Bulgarian context? Are there any typically Bulgarian specifics of the gender-neutral names? And last but not least, are there actually unisex names in Bulgaria? The point of departure of the study is the fact that traditional personal names usually indicate gender, or they are gender coded, as Alford stated in 1988, in 3 different ways that were actually discussed in the previous presentation, but you can see it again in my slide, formally by morphological, phonological compositions of names, conventionally, and semantically. On the contrary, gender-neutral names do not serve as gender markers according to Liberson et alia. In fact, they violate the strong genus-sexus congruence typical for the Bulgarian first names by structural changes. Well, in fact, traditional Bulgarian names are gender differentiated, mostly formally, on morphological level by suffixes and endings. Usually, there are male and female variants of the names. Suffixes serve as markers since there are masculine and feminine variants, And female names are always marked due to the obligatory feminine ending a or ya. Usually, male names end in consonant or o, while the female ones end in a. Here you can see examples of traditional gender-marked Bulgarian forenames, some of them coded by endings like Bujidar and Bujidara, Rat and Rada, Mito and Mita, or coded by suffixes like Cvetan and Cvetana, Venko, Venka, Slavej, Slaveja, Evgeni, Evgenia. I argue that the import and copying of foreign names and naming patterns leads to significant morphological phonological changes of the Bulgarian names. The last are defined as degendering by Damaris Nubling 2018. These changes prompt the appearance of gender-neutral names. Since there is a shift from gender-specific to gender-neutral names at an international level, the emergence of gender-neutral names in Bulgaria can be seen as closely connected to some current processes of the internationalization of naming patterns. I do believe that the said processes are the main reason for the appearance of gender-neutral names in Bulgaria. Their emergence, with no doubt, is a consequence of the cultural unification and intensified borrowings of names and naming patterns. As I find out, it started long before the recent shifts in conceptualizations of gender. However, gender ideology causes slow changes in the way traditional sexes are seen, which has already affected the naming patterns even in Bulgaria. To support this statement, I should cite a recent empirical study on naming motives published by Rada Levkova in 2019. According to her data, 0.64 of the respondents have indicated as their main naming motive the following: we choose this name because it was unisex. With respect to the Bulgarian names, the degendering takes place in two ways: by the loss of the obligatory feminine ending and by the gradual increase in names ending in untypical vowels, which are directly borrowed by foreign languages. And as a result, we have an increase in forenames which are not gender coded for the majority of the Bulgarian language users, hence they can be attributed to both sexes. My research is based on a relatively small range of data, the official registration data on newborns in the three biggest cities in Bulgaria in 2 consecutive years, 2009 and 2010, provided by the National Statistical Institute. However, they are representative enough since the birth rate is the highest in these cities, and it is the biggest cities where the name fashion is set. I also used the frequency dictionary of Nikolai Kovachev, showing tendencies in a long period of time, starting from 1890 till 1980. Now let's drive our attention to the current transitions in gender marking in Bulgarian forenames. Observations of modern names of newborns in Bulgaria show more and more frequent deviations from the rules just described, a departure from the typical gender coding of names. We identified 3 specific processes that influence the emergence of gender-neutral names. I have already mentioned 2 of them. First, at the beginning of the 21st century, the percentage of female personal names that do not have the obligatory ending a, ya, increased significantly. Formally, such names are associated with the masculine. You can see here different examples of female names. Some of them are borrowed from different languages like Abigail, Vivian, Carmen, Celeste. Others are formed copying different models, and they usually have variants with traditional A. Alice instead of Alisa, Annette instead of Annetta, Evelyn, Eleanor, etc. In comparison, in the 1950s, there were only about 20 names with 0 ending, according to Ilchev. But since 2011, the female personal name Nicole is permanently in the top 3 of all baby names in Bulgaria, according to the National Statistical Institute. So not only their diversity rose, but also their frequency. Second, the number of borrowed or newly created names with non-traditional endings U, I, E is also increasing. Sorry, this is the right slide. These names cannot be unequivocally defined by the Bulgarian speakers as male or female because their morphological phonological form points to the neuter gender. And you'll see different examples of names borrowed from different languages, predominantly from English, Italian, French, but also Greek, Turkish, and even some exotic cultures. Last but not least, new coinages, male variants of exclusively female names and vice versa, emerge, which are usually associated with the opposite sex. We have a new male name, Magdalene, coined from the female Magdalena, and the opposite, a female name, Javora, from the male Javor. In fact, all these changes in gender calling of personal names lead to a blurring of the boundary between male and female name stock. Are gender neutral names a new phenomenon in Bulgaria? To my surprise, I have found out that their appearance began around the beginning of the 20th century with the influx of numerous name borrowings from different European languages. Regarding the appearance of gender neutral names in Bulgaria, similar processes are observed as described in other personal name systems like the American, German, or Romanian. The first gender-neutral names were either diminutives ending in E or foreign names borrowed directly without being adapted to the Bulgarian language norms. Can you see the table with these names like Tony? Because I'm not sure if you see it. Right now.
Maybe not.
Okay, so anyway, there used to be names like Tony, Johnny, Lucy, and others of the kind that were borrowed, and they were attributed to male and female individuals. Predominantly, the source language from which the first gender-neutral names were borrowed in Bulgarian was French, since in French quite a few female and male personal names are homophones, although not homographs. And according to Nikolai Kovachev, some foreign names are sometimes used for both sexes. However, they are among the rarely used names. More often, these names are usually taken as masculine and their feminine equivalents are adapted to the norms of the Bulgarian language. In other words, they have the corresponding ending A. Angela, Valeria, Gabriela, Marcela, Simona. Only later, the names without an ending began to be used as female ones, for example, Angel, Gabrielle, Anis, Simone. The process of turning a male name into a female one and its final establishment as a predominantly female forename is characteristic of unisex names not only in Bulgaria, which once again confirms the similar development of these names in Bulgaria with global trends. According to our data, a total of 30 names are used as both male and female ones. I do hope you see the table right now. Okay. Well, this table contains some of the gender-neutral names I have found out in my data, not the whole list. We see that gender-neutral names differ significantly with respect to their frequency. For instance, Alex is a popular name which appears in all the cities and all the years studied. On the contrary, Anis is registered only in Sofia with two single uses as a female and a male name, respectively. On the other hand, although these names are used for both sexes, we see that the majority of them are predominantly associated with one of the two sexes. Alex, Valerie, Gabriel are rather male names, while Andrea seems to be a predominantly female. Those that occur equally as both male and female have very rare single and double uses like Anis and Angel. Now let's focus on the types of gender-neutral names. The diminutives have already been mentioned as one of the first gender-neutral names in Bulgaria. According to our data, there are only 4 diminutive names ending in E that are attributed to both sexes, Dani, Toni, Niki, Cveti. We expected that their number would be higher. We believe that if the scope of the studied data is expanded temporally or territorially, their number will increase because the lists we analyzed contain other examples of names of the kind, but referring either only to boys or only to girls. The most numerous gender-neutral names are actually foreign loan names. We excerpted 11 forenames which are used for the both sexes: Angel, Anis, Enis, Denis, Marcel, Nikita, Simon, Noah, etc. This is not a surprising result since, as Liberson et al. Stated, androgyny is especially prominent among unanchored and new names. As you can guess, these anthroponyms are very different as to their origins, meanings, and the path they took before becoming gender-neutral names. The last type of names deserve special attention, the so-called Rosalind type gender-neutral names. The emergence of new androgynous names is related to a process that is distinctly observed on Bulgarian soil and which is perhaps a specific Bulgarian phenomenon, at least to my knowledge. I have already mentioned about the sharp rise in female names ending in a consonant. In fact, in the recent years, more and more traditional Bulgarian female personal names have been affected by the dropping of the feminine ending as a sign of modernization. In this way, many new variants without the ending appeared. Ellen instead of Elena, Irene instead of Irena, Rosalind instead of Rosalina. You can see here in the table how the process. Often these new female names are homonyms and homographs of previously existing male names. This is how new unisex names such as Rosalind, Darian, Evelyn, Ivian appear in Bulgaria in the last few years. And my conclusions. The most important conclusion of the research is that today there is a tendency to weaken the strict gender marking of personal names. The study showed that changes of the morphological, phonological form, especially the loss of the traditional feminine ending, as well as the increased share of foreign names with atypical endings, lead to a breaking of genus-sexus congruence within personal names in Bulgaria. From the analysis made, it became clear that the total number of gender-neutral names of newborn children in the 2 years studied was 30. Although they are attributed to both male and female children, we could hardly define them as unisex names according to the definition of Liberson et alia. Those that have equal or almost equal gender distribution in one ear, because most of them are predominantly used for one of the two sexes. Like Alex is predominantly male and Andrea is predominantly female. Those names that to the greatest extent can be taken for unisex names have two rare single reference, Angel, Anis, Diane, Evian, Marcel. That's why we consider these gender neutral names still a boundary phenomenon in the Bulgarian personal name system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maya. So now you can stop sharing, and we have approximately 10 minutes for discussion. So who would like to start? Maybe I should also look in the chat. Has anyone asked any questions in the chat? Yeah, I can see some questions here, but perhaps could those people who wrote those questions in the chat could actually raise their hands and ask? I think it would be nicer to ask directly. If not, I will read the questions, but first I will ask if you could do it this way.
I think it's Jane speaking here. I think some of the questions in the chat from Shahid would be better for our general discussion at the end. The questions raising more general issues about names and behavior and so on. So I think perhaps the questions in the chat there can be dealt with when we have our more open discussion at the end.
Okay, that sounds good. So who would like to ask now concerning just these three, more specific questions concerning these three presentations? No one wants to be the first one. Yes, I can see. Yeah, Fatme, can you ask your question?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fatime Akbari, and I would like to ask the presenters about they presented wonderful lectures about gender neutral names. And I would like to know if they have any idea about the incentives or motivations for these names when parents call their kids with gender neutral names. What are the motivations behind them, if they have any idea about that? Thank you. My question could be to Dr. Balbach or Ms. Velahova.
So Anna, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start, but unfortunately in Germany we don't have really reasons for that. We have no surveys. We don't know exactly why parents choose gender neutral names. And as you could see in my presentation, just very few parents choose these names. So maybe one of the other presenters knows surveys about motivation of parents for their countries.
May I?
Yes, please.
Regarding the Bulgarian names, we don't have researches dedicated to motivations. We could only suggest, suppose why people choose such names. I suppose that they like these kind of names because they sound untraditional and unusual and more unique, but we cannot prove this. And some of these names that I mentioned, they are and which are not popular, because some of the names are popular, like Michel or René. These are popular names, and people know by convention that they might be female or male, but there are new names appearing in the last years that are very very unpopular, like Duigu or Efe. And when a Bulgarian hears such a name, we cannot guess the gender. It's really very untraditional, and so we have to ask about the gender of this person. Okay. And probably some of these people choose these names because there are international marriages. I mean, they are in a relationship, or they have a husband or a wife from a foreign country. Yeah. And that's why.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Just a quick comment for you, Maya, that in one of your slides you mentioned that Ali as a Turkish name. You were speaking about the names from Greek, Turkish, and this name, and you mentioned that Ali is a Arabic, is a Turkish name, but. As far as I know, Ali is a Arabic, not a Turkish name, but it's introduced to Turkish and other languages through Islamic culture.
Yes, that's for sure. But because we have a big Turkish community in Bulgaria, and this name is very popular, or not very, but it's popular among this community, and we usually, connect this name with this community. You're right, of course, you're right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Jane, you have a question?
Hello, yeah, my question's for Carmen. Carmen, I may have missed you mentioning this, but did you speak about what the Spanish law is with regard to people's names?
Law?
The law. So I think both Maya and Anne spoke about the legal.
Yes, we have a legislation that has some restriction about the avoidance of ambiguity in the gender of the people. But now this restriction has disappeared. Recently, this same year has disappeared. But until now, there was this kind of restriction that was really important. There was another one about the avoidance of names that may perhaps hurt the dignity of the person. I think this restriction is still operating, but the other has disappeared this same year. I have a question for my colleagues, if I may. Yeah, I would like to know if the gender neutral names that you have studied belong to the German or Bulgarian tradition in some cases, or are all of them, as I can see, from foreign origin? They are imported, they are borrowed, because that changes everything. My perspective is very different, because as you have seen in Spanish, there are nomina comunia, that is names that are traditionally for both men and women, and they have practically disappeared because this ambiguity is not very well considered. So I ask myself, in German and in Bulgarian, are there nomina comunia too, or are all those names gender neutral, imported or borrowed?
I could answer if you want. Maya, would you go first?
Well, traditionally, there wasn't gender neutral names in Bulgaria. All names used to be gender coded formally by suffixes and endings, or by convention. But as I showed, such names started to appear about 100 years ago, and this process was facilitated by the borrowing of foreign names from European languages, predominantly from French, from Italian, and from German. So the majority of gender-neutral names that we can find nowadays in Bulgaria, they are foreign by their origins. But because there are many foreign names, and the copying of naming patterns, naming models start to spread over traditional names. So we have a very big number of even traditional female names without ending. This process is very, very very many new names appear in the last few years. So that's how new gender neutral names appear as well, because we used to have some female names, and now we have homonymous some male names, and now we have homonymous new female variants, and these names are gender neutral already.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are traditional, like Elen, for instance. Yes, yeah. Elena is not a Bulgarian name by its origin, but it's a traditional Bulgarian name since centuries. So Bulgarians consider this name a traditional one, and we have also a male name, Elen, which is not connected to the female one. It means deer, the animal deer. So now we have the female variant Elen and the old male variant Elen, and that's how new gender neutral names emerge. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, perfectly.
So Anna, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I can add very short. In Germany, I think I told you that we have gender neutral names since 26 years. It's allowed from the law. And so there's not a big tradition. And most of the gender neutral names of today are international names, like unanchored names from other countries. But we have one region in Germany. It's in the north, the Frisian region, Friesisch in German, Frisian, I think, in English. And they have a long tradition of gender neutral names from short forms. You have the name like Janne for boys and for girls in this region, only in this region, and it's a short form for Johannes or Johanna. And we had it for a long time, but in the newer data, we see they are reducing very sharply.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, I think the time for our discussion is over. So if you have more questions, please remember them. I have also some questions, and we can continue in the last part in the general discussion. Okay. So Jane, now we should take the break. How long do you suggest? How many minutes shall we?
There's some delay on my machine. Every time I click on the microphone, it does it opposite to what I want it to do. Yeah, should we take a break until past? So we have about an 8-minute break. Is that okay with everybody? So we'll see you soon on the other side.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. It's now 2:30, so I'd like to resume for the next session. Giancarla, are you ready to?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. So for the next session, we have Giancarla Unser-Schutz, who's going to chair the next group of papers. So I'll hand over to Giancarla. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We have two very interesting papers now on Iceland and the Czech Republic. And our first one up is Agata Michnowska. I'm sorry if I mispronounce anything, from Adam Mickiewicz University. If you're ready, it'd be wonderful to hear what you have to say. Since we're starting a little bit later, I think it's 31 now, so 20 minutes would bring us to 51. Everything okay? Okay,
Right.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I would like to tell you that I might have some technical problems because of the weather conditions, but I hope I will somehow manage to tell you everything that I have planned to tell you today. So once again, my name is Agata Michnowska, right? Polish isn't so easy, but it's okay. Right. I'm a PhD candidate in Scandinavian linguistics, and today I want to tell you a bit about the Icelandic naming system, or more precisely about gender-neutral given names that are used contemporarily in Iceland. Icelanders and Icelandic, the Icelandic language, is known for its linguistic purism. Icelanders try to preserve their language in a rather untouched form, right? They try to avoid borrowing words, and basically the whole society is involved in this policy. And in many years, the Icelandic naming system has been conservative as well. Nowadays, it is undergoing significant changes, which I'm going to talk about later on. Okay. So Icelandic first names or given names usually have a long history. And many of the names can be found already in old Icelandic sagas, and yeah, there are still in use. And the same with names derived also from, for example, Old Norse mythology. And importantly, it was forbidden in Iceland until 1996 to have a foreign name. Icelandic names must always consist of letters which are used in the Icelandic alphabet. Although it sometimes happens that some letters, like for example C, which is not in the alphabet, can be used in a name because of some historical reasons. And Icelandic names should also decline because, yeah, in Iceland you decline everything. And they cannot be shameful for the bearer, right? You just have to have a name which is okay, which nobody will laugh oh, yeah. And here you can see the most important document connected to Icelandic personal names. It's called Lög om mannanöfn. Sorry for my Icelandic, I'm still learning. And so this is law on people's names. So again, a name should be able to take the possessive case. It should have a long history. It cannot violate the Icelandic language system, and it should be written in accordance with writing rules, written or spelled. Okay. There is a special institution that takes care of the names of Icelanders. It's called Mannanafnanefnd, and it was founded in 1991. And to be honest, it has been criticized since then. The committee maintains the official register of approved names and governs the introduction of new names. So should you wish to have a name that is not on the list, you have to submit your proposal to the committee. And then the committee checks whether the name follows all the rules and then decides if it should be put on the list or not. And according to many Icelanders, the committee's decisions were often subjective, as they rejected a lot of given names and patronymics as well, because they're also responsible for patronymics / matronymics. And the most famous example was the case of Pleir Bjarkardóttir. She was an Icelandic teenager whose name was not approved by the committee since it came from a masculine common noun. This became problematic because according to the old law, the old naming law, as a girl, she should have a female name, right? So you can see this on the slide. Like a girl should be given a female name and a man should be given only a male name. And in the official documents, she was known as Stúlka, meaning simply a girl. So she was called in the documents Stúlka Bjarkardóttir. Importantly, her mother thought that this was a feminine noun. She had taken it from a book written by Halldór Laxness, and in the novel there was a girl called Pleir. So she thought that it would be okay to have this name. And the girl and her mother won in the court, and now she's officially known as Pleir. And in 2019, the naming law was finally changed. The Icelandic parliament approved some laws regarding gender autonomy that provide people the right to define themselves. According to the law, each Icelandic person from the age of 15 has the right to a gender self-identification. And this also means that given names are no longer restricted by gender. So it's legal to use a unisex name, and everyone can have it. No longer it is needed to indicate person's sex in patronymics or matronymics. So they don't need to put suffixes son or tóttir in their patronymics or matronymics. They can instead use a gender-neutral suffix pur, meaning a child. Maybe it's not connected to given names, but I just wanted to tell you about it. Excuse me? Okay. I think somebody wanted to say something. Anyway, this option, however, can be used only by Icelanders who are officially registered as neither male nor female. But it's only when it comes to patronymics, because everyone can have a unisex first name in Iceland now. Yeah. So now let's move to the gender-neutral names that have been approved by the committee. Still, of course, you have to submit your proposal and wait for the committee's decision. Okay, somebody is. I'm having some technical problems, so I will just look at the question later on. Okay, so still you have to submit your proposal and wait for the committee's decision, right? And so far there have been 26 proposals, and all of them were accepted by the committee. So generally, the committee didn't have any longer comments on the proposals. So they indicated that, okay, the name was able to take the possessive case, it didn't violate the Icelandic language system, it was spelled in accordance with the rules, and it wasn't shameful. So yeah, so it could be, so all of, so maybe not all, I will talk about them later on, but generally speaking, it was okay to accept these names. But there were 3 names that needed a little bit longer commentary. So the first, Skylar or Skylar, I'm not sure if how I should read the name. So the problem was with the spelling of this name. because according to the rules of Icelandic, it shouldn't include the letter Y here, because in such like when you have these SK, sorry, then you shouldn't have Y after that, unless it is supported by the origin. And the committee added that it was only possible to accept this style of writing if there was some evidence that this name has earned a tradition. Another thing was that the name hadn't occurred in any of the censuses before, right? In any of the Icelandic register. So yeah, it didn't have a long history in the society, in the Icelandic society. And the committee finally took under the consideration the name's history in the source language. And since it has roots in Dutch and it has been used in the United States, they decided that, okay, this spelling can be accepted because it is used in some places. And therefore the name was accepted, although it sounds quite weird. And a similar problem was with the name Queen. The letter Q isn't used in the Icelandic language. And the name, again, it didn't have a long history in the Icelandic society. It didn't appear in any of the Icelandic registers. But again, the committee took under the consideration the fact that in the source language, this is Irish, the name was written this way, and therefore they somehow had to accept it, and now it can be used as a unisex Icelandic name. And finally, the last name, the name Alpha, and the name again is not written in accordance with the general writing rules of the Icelandic language, as the consonant PH is not written in uncompounded words in Icelandic. It was therefore only possible to agree with the writing of this name Alpha, but it was some evidence that it has earned a tradition. But again, it didn't have any tradition in Iceland because there was only one boy with that name, and he was born in 2015. It wasn't enough, because there are some rules what it means that a name has a history. So like there must be some number of people who have this name. But since the name was a foreign origin again, and it was stated that okay, it had been derived from the name of the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and it's used in several places in the world with this spelling Alpha. The committee somehow had to accept the name, and also they suggested its declension pattern, since it's rather an unusual word in Icelandic. Okay, so as you can see, there's a significant revolution going on in the Icelandic naming system because there are more and more unisex names allowed, and I think it's likely to get some more by the end of the year, right? Because it's still September. Most of these names can be easily accepted by the naming committee. Sometimes it takes some more effort, right? They need some more commentaries. And what's important is that the society is generally speaking in favor of this new naming policy. The only thing that causes problems is the declension of the gender-neutral names. People simply don't know which endings should the unisex names get. Like, should it always be neutral, since we are talking about gender-neutral names, or should it be written in accordance with the declension of common nouns the names are derived from? And the linguists talk about it. They try to find some solution, and of course, it will take some time to have some general rules connected to this. And this is another topic which I'm going to talk maybe one day. Okay, so tack för det. Thank you for your attention, and here's the literature. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for keeping the time. We are well on schedule now. So our next presentation then is going to be on the Czech language with Janita and Pavel. Hello, are you guys there? Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Okay. So our next presentation by Janita Dvorakova and Pavel Stepan, I'm sorry again if it's mispronounced, from the Czech Academy of Sciences, will be on the topic gender-neutral names and transgender people in Czechia. So when you guys are ready, please share the screen and we can start. It's 46 now, maybe take a moment to set it up, and we start from 47. So that would bring us another 20 minutes after that. So, 07. Everything good? Okay.
Good afternoon.
I can see it okay. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Pavel Stepan, and I will present the joint work of Janeta and myself. According to the Czech gender linguist Jana Valdrova, gender-neutral names involve cases when one and the same name occurs both in men and women. However, we find it necessary to ask a question that may be rather surprising or provocative, and this question is, do such names exist in Czech at all? Two answers to this question may be possible. The first one is positive, as forms such as René, Nikola, Sava, Kim, Alex, and others may be used for both men and women in Czech. However, this answer seems to be rather superficial in our opinion, because it does not take into account the grammatical system of Czech language. The other answer, which we find much more appropriate, is no. Gender-neutral names, that is, forms common for both men and women, do not exist in Czech. Cases such as René, Nikola, Kim, Alex, and others represent only partial homonymy, and it is necessary to consider not only the basic form of the name, that is the nominative form, but the whole paradigm. On this slide, the morphological paradigms of three names, René, Alex, and Sava, are represented. As you can see, only in a minority of cases, the same form applies to both the masculine and the feminine form of the name. However, we must say that despite our skeptical attitude towards the applicability of the term gender-neutral names on Czech name forms, we will use this term in our paper as it is generally established on the international level. It is important to underline that Czech, as well as a majority of other Slavic languages, is an inflectional language, one of the obligatory grammatical categories occurring not only in nouns, but due to grammatical concord, also in adjectives and some verb forms, is gender. Consequently, each personal name has a grammatical gender and only one gender in a particular case. A name of a particular person is normally inflected according to one inflectional paradigm, either masculine or feminine. This character of the Czech grammatical system may cause problems when a name is to be applied to non-binary people. it is extremely difficult to solve this problem. Some Czech non-binary people prefer regular alternation of the paradigms and the gender of their name. In one sentence, their name should be used as a masculine and in the other as feminine. However, this solution seems to be rather impractical, as it may cause not only problems in communication, but ultimately perhaps even stigmatization of the holder of the given name. Now let's proceed to the process of evaluating gender-neutral names by the Czech Language Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague. Our institute has been evaluating names and also surnames since the year 2009, and our expert opinions form also the data used as a material base for this paper. When evaluating gender-neutral names, we have to respect the Registration Name and Surname Act from the year 2000, later partially amended. According to this law, it is impossible to register a female name to a person of male gender and vice versa. By the end of the year 2022, we have evaluated almost 2,500 opinions, and 235 of them, that is approximately 10%, have been assessed as gender neutral, that is applicable to both men and women. And only in 114 cases, a gender neutral name was specifically required by the applicant. On this chart, the gradual growth of the number of evaluated gender-neutral names, together with the overall growth of the number of all evaluated names, is represented. And gender-neutral names are represented by the gray color in the individual columns. Now we will focus on the names required specifically as gender-neutral names by the applicants. In almost half of these cases, we do not know the reason why a gender-neutral name is picked. It can be estimated that in many of these cases, the reason is the process of transition of the potential name holder. It is even more probable in case of older requests, because several years ago, trans people were more reluctant to talk about their status. Almost the other half of applicants explicitly mentioned that the reason for their request is their transition, change of gender. Other given reasons have been rather exceptional. Two applicants mentioned their non-binary identity, and 3 applicants required a gender-neutral name for their expected child of so far unknown gender. Now, what are the legal regulations influencing names of trans people in Czech Republic? Unlike in some other countries, transition is conditioned by a surgical change, which is followed by an administrative change in Czechia. During the process of transition, a gender-neutral name can be used. According to the law, this change is not obligatory. However, the committee of the Ministry of Health, which decides about the transition, usually requires this change, considering it an integral part of the therapy. After the end of the transition, the name must be changed to correspond with the final gender, and this change is obligatory. Experts differ in opinions on the use of gender-neutral names during the transition process. When evaluating gender-neutral names, the same criteria must be used as in case of any other names, of course. According to the Registry Name and Surname Act, only an existing name with correct spelling can be registered. What is important, corrupted, diminutive or unofficial forms are excluded. Gender-neutral names must be attested as both male and female forms. The Czech Ministry of Interior has recently responded to the growing demand for gender-neutral names among trans people by publishing a list of more than 4,000 gender-neutral names that should be registered by the registry offices without a need of an expert opinion. This list, published online in 2023, so this year, has been based on the research of the Czech Language Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences. The demand for this list has been caused especially by the fact that the repertory of gender-neutral names used in Czechia had been very limited. Now let's proceed to a typology of gender-neutral names based on the origin of the individual male and female forms. We can distinguish four groups of names required to be evaluated as gender-neutral. The first group is formed by cases in which male and female forms have the same origin. These cases form 55% of the analyzed data. The second group, short forms of different names of the same origin, form 13%. The third group, forms of entirely different origin, 32%. And the last group, forms that may have both common and different origin due to different possible interpretations, form 2% of the data. At first, male and female names having the same origin. On this slide, you can see some examples of such names originating from different countries and languages. Now, to proceed, now the three examples of short forms of different names of the same origin. The first one is Alex, from male name Alexander, as well as from female name Alexandra. Andy, from male name Andrew, or from female name Andrea. Gabi, both from Gabriel or Gabriela. On this slide, forms of entirely different origin are represented. As you can see, various combinations of languages and countries of origin can be found here. Exceptionally, forms that may have both common and different origin due to different possible interpretations can be found. For example, the gender-neutral form lux that can be interpreted in case of both genders from the Latin noun lux, meaning light, but also as a male form. It can be interpreted as a short form of the name Lucas. In some cases, We can follow also the relationship between the old and the new name of a person in transition, though this data is rather limited. It can be observed that trans people often do not reject their original name entirely. They sometimes choose a formally similar name. For example, the original female name Amalie is replaced by gender-neutral Amari. Adela is replaced by Ad, Terezie by Theo, Marek by gender-neutral name Mary. In other cases, at least, the initial letter is preserved. For example, Linda is changed to Leo, Miroslav to Maki. In case of male to female change, variation of the original name is more frequent. For instance, Michal changed to Michel, Petr changed to Petra, or Karel to Kaya. However, other applicants choose a new name entirely independently of the original one. For example, Anna changed to Theo, Linda to Sam, Pavel to Gabi, Wojciech to Eliza, etc. Also, some other tendencies can be detected in our data. If trans people choose a temporary gender-neutral name, which is to be changed to a final gender-specific name once the transition is completed, then they usually try to choose a name as similar to the picked final name as possible. For example, the temporary gender-neutral name Sam is to be changed to Samuel, Oli to Oliver, and Philip to Philip with different spelling. What is also evident is that trans people often choose a name which can be evaluated as gender neutral, but it is often understood as gender specific by a majority of Czech speakers, because it is typical of the gender desired by the person in transition. For example, a person undergoing the change female to male often chooses neutral names like Michael, Vincent, or Theo, which are much more usual for males than for females, and the other way around. A trans person, male to female, applies for gender neutral names like Julie, Mary or Mary, or Amalie, which are usually perceived as female names. To conclude and to summarize, the specific linguistic status of Czech as well as other Slavic languages, that is, the strong inflectional character of the language, results in an important role of a grammatical gender. Consequently, a name can hardly exist in the language system and in a communication without assigning it a specific grammatical gender, and only one grammatical gender in the given case, in the given communication situation. This results in the fact that the established term gender neutral name is rather problematic if it is applied on Czech or other languages of a similar inflectional character. Another result of this fact is a relatively small interest in gender-neutral names for newborns. In Czech background, gender-neutral names are used mostly by trans people. They are rarely chosen for newborns. However, the development in this field is extremely dynamic, and the trends may change in time, of course, and therefore it will be necessary and very interesting to follow the further development of the use of gender-neutral names in future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful talks. And the time is perfect. We should have about 10 minutes. I think we're back completely on schedule. Is there anybody who would like to speak or ask a question from the floor? We can also look at the chat. I think there are a few ones there. If anybody would like to raise their hand, we can start there. Okay. Oh, yeah, Ivona, please.
Yeah, since I'm also from the Czech Republic, I found the topic, of Pavel and Janeta really interesting, and I want to ask right away. I also saw the list of the gender-neutral names that appeared on the internet in July 2023. And maybe you said it, maybe I just didn't catch it, but I would really like to know how this list was, compiled. Because when I saw the names, I was really surprised, what kind of names I could see there. So many names I saw for the first time in my life, or I saw their names, like you mentioned Tommy, being gender neutral. I wonder how it was decided which names are gender neutral, based on what criteria. Could you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yes, this list was compiled based on the excerption of dictionaries of names from several languages. Because it is important to follow our Czech laws, so we cannot use some official registers of names registered in some countries, but we must base this list on linguistic sources. So we used works by onomasticians, dictionaries of names, and in many of these dictionaries, unisex names or gender-neutral names are marked. So this was the basis of the list.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is, something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, not only when thinking about Czech names, also thinking about Japanese names, because, and what it means to be gender neutral. I think it's something everyone discusses in the papers today, and something we will also touch on in the final discussion. But because, for example, then again, I will return just to the name Tommy you mentioned. I think Giancarla would agree that it's a female name. I'm sure some males with this name can be found, because like in Japan, since names are not anyhow restricted for gender, basically we'll find any name given to both genders, but this doesn't mean that you would consider the name, gender neutral. So this is something I, just keep thinking about all the time. I think it must have been really difficult to make this list and make the decisions, and to decide which dictionaries to choose. And
it's true. Many of these forms are used in different languages. So there are many cases when one form is used as a female form in one language, and in another language it's used as a female form, and it has entirely a different origin. So especially in such short forms such as Tommy, well, I must say I don't remember the exact reason why we included this name on the list, but in similar cases it can be this reason.
I see. So you're combining, from different languages. That makes sense. Thank you. You're muted.
Muted. Sorry. Oops. So our next person, you had your hand up, is Anna Maria. You can go if you would like, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the two very interesting talks. And I would have a question for Pavel. I'm so curious about the name Lux you mentioned. You said it's a German short form for Lukas. And I have never heard that in German. So I'm just curious if you know anything about it. Is it like an old form, or is it maybe just a short form that is used in the Czech Republic and adapted from a German form? Or do you know anything about it?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact source, but probably this form was taken from one of the German name dictionaries.
Ah, okay.
But I would have to look it up in our sources, because there are really many of these names, several thousands. So I do not remember every single name at the moment. I'm sorry.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, so next up was Jane, I believe. If you would like to ask your question, please.
Thank you. I have a question for Agatha. I was very interested, Agatha, in the story that you opened your presentation with at the beginning about it was a news story about reporting on the girl whose name had been challenged, and she was just referred to as girl by the authorities. And I wondered if what the reaction was in Iceland to, in the wider public to this story. How did people respond to the story? Agatha, are you there? Oh, maybe we've lost Agatha.
Unfortunately, when I search her name right now, it's not coming up in the list of participation.
Okay.
Yeah, that's too bad. I had actually, completely unrelated, but I have read some of those articles on the Icelandic name because it was a very big piece of news for this topic. I don't have anything particularly to say since I don't know anything about Iceland, but it was very interesting that we had this difference between what was seen, how the mother perceived it, and how the officials perceived it. That ended up being the issue in the end, I think, at least for part of it. But oh well, too bad we can't hear more from the authority.
Yeah. Would be interested to know who sits on that committee. Yep. Is it white middle-aged men who sit on that committee and who are making these decisions about what are acceptable or unacceptable names for the Icelandic context? That would be an interesting thing to know about. Like you, I don't know enough about the Icelandic context.
No, unfortunately. If anybody else knows about Iceland and would want to let us know about it, I would love to hear about it as well as anything else. Do we have any other questions or comments? Anybody? This is not really a question so much as a comment for our Pavel and Janeta. I actually have seen some interesting posts online for people looking for names that are gender neutral or examples of it from the Czech Republic. It was very interesting. One of the ones I saw, this was on Reddit, and there was somebody who was searching for an example of a female example of the name Mordecai, which, as most of the people in the comments said, was traditionally a male Jewish name. But for whatever reason, the person who, they explained that they were in transition, they were looking for this. They had already decided they wanted this name, and now they needed to find proof that it was an acceptable name for them in terms of the regulations of what the government required for them. It seemed like an interesting process, but it also, to me, this was somebody who was writing in English, since unfortunately I do not speak Czech. So I was reading it on an English post, which tells you that people are also going and getting information from other cultures, and they're using that as part of how they're trying to get examples. Outside of the Czech example here, for example, I know I've gotten contact from people in Norway, I believe it was, trying to give me examples of Japanese names that could fulfill their gender neutral needs. They wanted to have proof that this was used as a girl's name in Japan, as opposed to Norway. I think the name was Otto, which would be, very masculine, but not maybe so in Japanese. So you see it's kind of international or global convergence here to some degree. I don't really have very much else to research-wise to say about that, but that's something of interest, I think, as well. I think we are at the time that we are. Jane, you have your hand up if you wanted to say something else.
Just one, I thought I'd recycle my question that I put to Agata and ask Pavel and Zaneta and Ivona too, in terms of the media coverage of these kinds of issues. What would you say? How do you say the Czech people respond to gender neutral debates about gender neutral names and those kinds of developments that you were talking about, Pavel?
Well, I think gender neutral names are not a hot issue in Czech Republic, because gender neutral names in Czechia are used by the trans community and not usually used for newborns. So this is not a hot topic.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that we are now at time, although I see, Ivona, did you have your hand up again?
I was just going to add that I think it is a hot topic for non-binary people. I am now a little bit involved in these things because my PhD student identifies as non-binary, and she does her work on this, and so I can see that a lot has been talked about in terms of non-binary people or trans people, as Pavel mentioned, but I think generally it's not something that would be that much discussed. So yeah, I agree with Pavel.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Carla, for chairing that session. So we'll have another break now, and then we have a longer group of 3 papers coming up next. So shall we come back for again on the half hour? So at 3:30 my time. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Hello again, everybody. We now move on to the last grouping of our presentations this afternoon, and I'm very grateful to Anna Balba for chairing this session. So I'll hand over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, welcome back, everybody. And we have now the last and long session of 3 papers, but also 3 very interesting papers. And as you can see, our first presenters are our host, Ivona Barešová and Teresa Nakaya from Palacký University Olomouc. And their topic is, as you can see, gender-neutral names on the youngest Japanese generation, characteristics of their phonological and graphic forms. And Ivona and Teresa, we are looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. So let me start by saying that my colleague Teresa and I are delighted to participate in today's symposium and share our latest findings regarding gender-neutral names in Japan with you. During our presentation, we aim to introduce this type of name in the context of Japanese naming practices and offer insights into the origins and characteristics of names that have recently been used for both boys and girls. This study is part of our ongoing project exploring non-gender specific names in contemporary Japan. Let's start with a name selection story published on the parenting website Baby Calendar, Baby Karenda in Japanese. It reads, "We think that recently gender has not been limited just to male and female, and so considering the future, we decided on a gender-neutral name for our son. His name is Shion. My husband thought, however, that it would be good to have it at least written with masculine kanji. Kanji are Japanese characters. The website includes name selection stories of 21 boys and 11 girls named Shion, born between 2008 and 2022. As you can see from this chart, the name has 24 different graphic forms, some of which give a more masculine impression, others are more feminine, and some lack gender-specific features altogether. In a larger data set, it's quite likely that some of the forms that were found only with girls or boys would be found with both genders."
Okay, when Japanese parents select a name for their child, they are not limited to a closed stock of existing names, and there are no legal regulations regarding gender. A Japanese name can be written in kanji, which are adapted Chinese characters, as Ivona already said, or in one of the 2 syllabaries, hiragana or katakana. The selection of kanji permitted in names is limited, currently to approximately 3,000. The creation of a Japanese name is often quite an elaborate process, inspired by particular ideas about the named individual, the time or circumstances of birth, and aspirations for their future life. The process is guided by a number of criteria, which include the meaning of the kanji used, the sound, and the overall image the name evokes. And also, for example, a fortunate number of strokes to ensure the child a good fate. Names used for both boys and girls are by no means a new phenomenon in Japan. Nevertheless, for most of the 20th century, the vast majority of Japanese given names followed structural patterns typical for male or female names of that particular period. One of the most typical gender-specific features were masculine and feminine end syllables and corresponding gender-specific kanji. For example, Yukio is a male name and Yukiko is a female name. Japanese names of the last several decades display a much greater variety of sound and structure patterns than earlier in the 20th century, and increasingly lack gender-distinctive features. The strongest indicator of gender in contemporary names is still the combination of the last syllable and the last kanji. This combination tends to carry the most significant gender associations. While the majority of contemporary Japanese names are gender-specific, Recent baby name rankings indicate a growing popularity of names like Shion, that is, names that do not clearly express gender in their phonological and/or graphic form, and are given to both boys and girls. The top 100 baby boy and baby girl names of 2022, published by Baby Calendar, featured 19 names that were given to boys and girls. Such a high number has never been seen before in the past. This recent phenomenon has been widely commented on in the media, including newspapers, lifestyle web magazines, blogs and discussion forums, and numerous parenting and baby name websites. In the Japanese public discourse, these names are most often referred to as chūsei-teki na namae or genderless na namae. These names are usually explained as names that can be given to both boys and girls, names that do not feel unnatural when used by boys and girls, or names that do not evoke a sense of masculinity or femininity. The gender-neutral character of names is usually discussed based on their phonological form. Subsequently, it is advised that the resulting name can be made more suitable for a boy or a girl through its graphic form. So we encounter a somewhat paradoxical situation when gender-neutral names defined as suitable for children of both sexes are subsequently referred to as gender-neutral names suitable for boys or suitable for girls.
The data we worked with in our study consisted of roughly 15,000 names of children born between 2008 and 2022 and descriptions of their selection, so-called name selection stories, which we collected from the already mentioned website Baby Calendar. The descriptions provide variously detailed information about the motivations, criteria, intended interpretation of the kanji used, and so on. While this source, of course, has various limitations, it is one of few sources available in Japan which provides complex information concerning each name. As evident from the table, the dataset comprises a substantial number of different names, different phonological and graphic forms, with a relatively low average occurrence. This shows how incredibly diverse contemporary Japanese names are. 256 unique phonological forms and 333 unique graphic forms are present in both lists. They, however, appear with differing frequencies. So while, for example, the name Sena has a balanced gender distribution, the name Sakura substantially prevails as a name for girls and Haruki as a name for boys. This shows that names are not only purely gender specific or gender neutral, but that they create a range between these two types. For further analysis, we narrow down the set of phonological and graphic forms based on two criteria. The frequency of occurrence. We selected phonological and graphic forms with at least an average occurrence in the dataset, and based on the proportion of girls and boys given that name. We selected names with a ratio lower than 4:1. And we ended up with 39 phonological and 57 graphic forms, which we will from now on refer to as gender neutral. So first, let's have a look at some characteristic features of the phonological forms. Unsurprisingly, the names found in both name sets are either 2 or 3 mora long, so they're quite short. Unlike longer Japanese names, which are typically male, 2 and 3 mora names are common as both male and female. Generally speaking, what these names have in common is that they contain no features that are commonly associated with one or the other gender, or contain both masculine and feminine features. The names can be divided into several overlapping categories based on their nature or factors that contribute to their unisex character. So some of the short two-mora names popular for both boys and girls, like the name you, for example, were probably motivated by gender-specific names consisting of a two-mora core or onymic base and a usually gender-specific end syllable. So names like Yuto, Yuta, Yuma are masculine, whereas Yuko, Yuka, Yuna are feminine. And as it is the end part that makes this type of name gender specific, its absence results in the loss of gender markedness. These bimoraic names are popular and easily related to both genders, also because they are identical to clipped forms of those longer names, both male and female, which are commonly used as a basis for hypochoristic forms and nicknames. So Yu-chan is a hypochoristic form of all these names. Unlike Totama, which are typically masculine, and Kokana, which are typically feminine, some end syllables are not strongly associated with either gender. The most frequent is Ki, which in fact was associated with male names in the past. Other end syllables, such as Hi, have become popular only recently and are not associated with either gender. Some phonological forms are semantically transparent. That is, they are identical to commonly used appellatives or common names of plants. For example, Asahi means the morning sun, or Natsu, for example, means the summer or summer. And their meaning, in addition to their sound, also influences their perception in terms of gender. So those given to both boys and girls represent meanings or evoke images that are not strongly associated with either gender, or express aspirations that are desirable for both boys and girls, or reflect the time of birth in a way that is not gender specific. Some of these names can be labeled as retro names like Chihiro, Kaede, Uta, as they are reminiscent of old times and old traditional names, often semantically associated with the Japanese domestic culture. In the past, however, they were not necessarily gender neutral. And some names are perceived as suitable for both genders, as they contain both masculine and feminine features. For example, this name, Iori, was originally a male name. The soft-sounding ri or ori and the resemblance to female names such as kaori or shiori can make the name feel feminine. At the same time, its masculine image is maintained due to a well-known bearer of this name, a 17th century samurai Miyamoto Iori, now a popular anime character. Or these short monothematic names such as Uta or Ito actually used to be female names in the past, more than a century ago. Nowadays, names ending in ta and to are mostly male names, which can make these names related also to boys. And yet another factor that contributes to the unisex character of some of the analyzed names is their resemblance with a foreign name or word. For example, the name Ruka contains an end syllable typical of Japanese female names, indicating the usability of this name for girls. At the same time, it is a boy's name, Luka, in the West, which indicates the usability of this name for boys.
Okay, now let's take a look at the characteristic features of the graphic forms. All 57 gender-neutral graphic forms are written in kanji, and all of them consist of either one or two kanji. Hiragana, the phonographic syllabary, is generally associated with female names, and katakana is rarely used in contemporary names. Some of the listed single kanji names were previously used as male names, but many of these kanji have become popular in names only in the last decades of the 20th century, when single kanji names started to be increasingly given also to girls. Kanji used in names are typically chosen to represent the phonological form of the name and convey specific meanings. As illustrated by the example of the male name Kaito, They can refer to particular places, people, events, and directly or metaphorically represent desired future qualities or aspirations for the child. However, some kanji are used primarily for their reading, regardless of their meaning. The kanji that are used in the analyzed graphic forms can be divided into three large semantic groups. The largest group consists of kanji related to the natural world. These characters began to gain popularity in names in the 1990s and have remained popular since. They are used not only for the meanings they denote, but also for the various associations and images they evoke. The second small group includes kanji related to human qualities, emotions, human life, and relationships. The third group consists of other kanji, typically representing abstract phenomena, actions, and activities. In names, they often serve to semantically complement or support a semantically dominant kanji belonging to either group A or group B. What many of these kanji have in common is that they express, whether directly or metaphorically, human qualities and values that are desired for both boys and girls. The most prominent among these is yasashisa, kindness, and related qualities such as good-heartedness, friendliness, and optimism, and values related to interpersonal relationships. Okay, so now let me summarize the current situation. As we have seen in the example of Shion, some names are gender-neutral only in their phonological form, but gender-specific in their graphic form. Here are three more examples from the corpus: Mahiro, Natsuki, and Uta. Some of the kanji used are strongly associated with males or females. Hiragana is another means of making a name look feminine. This type of name is what the various baby name websites call gender-neutral name suitable for girls or boys. But there are also names that are gender-neutral in their graphic form, but gender-specific in their phonological form. These three examples demonstrate the most typical differences in the reading of the kanji, which may make the phonological form gendered. This example shows a single kanji name which has two distinct types of reading, Sino-Japanese and Japanese. The Sino-Japanese readings, Shin and Jin, are typically used for boys' names, while the Japanese readings Kokoro and Koko are commonly used in female names. In this second example, a Japanese reading of a single kanji name, corresponding to a verbal form ending in u, like Nagomu, is usually used as a male name, while a nominal form ending in e, like Nagomi, is usually used as a female name. Some of the kanji used at the end position represent different gender-specific sounds in male and female names. For example, this kanji is often read to in male names, but ne in female names. Some of the currently popular names are truly gender-neutral. That is, they are gender-neutral in their phonological as well as graphic form. These are mainly single kanji names that are often semantically transparent, such as Sora, meaning the sky, or Kaede, meaning a maple. Two kanji names that are gender-neutral in both aspects are usually names with traditional or conventional graphic form, such as Hinata, meaning sunny place, or the already mentioned Iori, derived from an office title used for samurai centuries ago.
So let me just briefly conclude. As we could see, the specific development that leads to a given name becoming gender neutral in its phonological form is difficult to determine. Clearly, multiple factors are involved to varying degrees in this process. As we have seen, a phonological form that is primarily associated with one gender may emerge from abroad as a name given to the opposite gender. Or a feature that was once gender specific, such as a two-mora structure of a name, may lose this distinction over time. In order to become accepted among people as gender neutral, it is important for a name which is originally associated only with one gender to appear in the public space as a name borne by the opposite gender. So many of the currently popular gender-neutral names are names of various celebrities, popular fictional characters from manga, anime, or TV shows. As we could see, graphic forms of names display a greater variety than phonological forms. And in addition to the more popular forms that are generally acknowledged as gender neutral, there are many graphic forms with a low occurrence, which cannot be clearly determined as male or female. The characteristics and tendencies we have described are based on a relatively small set of names. However, I want to point out that these tendencies can also be seen in a wider group of names in our data set, and also in data from an earlier period. And finally, as we could see in the opening story, some parents deliberately choose a name that is not gendered. However, this is not always the intention, and the non-gender specific character of some names is often a mere byproduct of the effort to choose a name that would be original and auspicious. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivona and Teresa, very much for this very interesting talk. Now we will stay with the Japanese names. Our next talk. Yeah, Giancarlo, you are there.
Yeah. Okay, I will set things up. Just give me a moment.
Yes, of course.
I need to do this.
Yes.
I will put it on the slideshow. Can you see?
Yeah, excuse me, Giancarlo.
Please.
Yes, we see you. We see you and we see your screen. So
great.
Is Giancarlo Anzorschutz from Rishu University in Japan. And now she will speak about the role of baby naming guides in the recreation of gender in names, a case study of a popular Japanese guide. Okay. Giancarlo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thankfully, because we just had a talk on Japanese names, there's a lot of things that I can skip that should hopefully make things a little easier for you to understand. I think there are some things that are perhaps a little unfamiliar if you don't know about Japanese writing, about Japanese names. It can make it difficult to understand, but I think we know a lot about that now, so great. So the first thing I wanted to mention here, aside from the gender neutral names as one issue, in general, Japanese naming patterns have gone through really very intense change. And it's been picked up in the media, it's been picked up in academic research, it's talked about a lot. People are very interested in it as a topic. And I would say that, say, if it was maybe might be 50 years ago, or this is supposed to be 100 years ago, the majority of Japanese names would have been fairly identifiable through gendered endings. But what you find nowadays is that there are less of these gendered endings being used on names. And even when they are being used, they might be different usages than they had been in the past. So there are some calls, as we've just talked about, that are impressing us that gender neutral names or names that are maybe unclear are becoming somewhat more common, maybe not popular, but more common than in the past. There is other data, though, that we can see that if you look at the details, there are very distinct differences in terms of how Japanese girl names and boy names are formed, the kind of kanji they're used in them. But we don't know exactly what those differences are. We know that they don't necessarily use the same kanji, for example, but we don't necessarily know what is the differences about those kanji. So one of the things that becomes an issue is we know that Japanese names are changing, and we know that gender neutral names are becoming more common. There's a lot of research that suggests this. So then how do people recognize names as being gendered or not gendered? Is this something that they care about or that they are aware of when they choose a name? And how is such information shared amongst us within society? How do people come up with this understanding that this name is gendered or not gendered? One possibility that I'd like to bring up today is baby naming guides, both in English and in Japanese, and I'm sure many, many other languages. There's a very large number of books and websites that are offering primarily non-academic information about naming trends and practices and general advice about how to choose names. And we see some people have suggested that this is because these guides are becoming more popular because people are trying to choose the perfect name. Other research that you might notice is that people are increasingly choosing names within the nuclear family. So it's just the mother and the father or whoever else is involved within that group choosing a name. So they want resources. And these are convenient in that sense. An interesting point for the Japanese situation is that particular guides, the guide that I'm going to talk about today, in fact, have been said to be kind of the root for some of these new types of names that have come out. But you actually find that most of the research on Japanese names and in other cultures as well hasn't really looked at any of these kind of guides or these other alternative ways of giving people advice about getting baby names. There is some exceptions, but the exceptions that I have found have either been fairly old at this point or not particularly detailed, unfortunately. And what you do find instead for Japanese anyways, that most of the data focuses on ranked data sets, school records, municipal newspapers, or other alternative forms that primarily focus on just how many names we're seeing rather than say, how do people choose names? What kind of processes do they go through? What kind of resources are available for them? So what I am going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking about, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully this particular guide here that is by Tamahio. So Tamahio is pretty much, I would say, the baby guide group. It's a series of products made by Benesse, which is an educational company that comes from tamago, eggs, and hyoko chicks. They make magazines, they make toys, they make pretty much everything that you might want, they do it. But in terms of names, how they're relevant is that they have a maternity magazine called Tamago Club that featured naming columns from pretty much the beginning on a irregular fashion from about 1993. This is a very popular magazine amongst that particular genre. And it's fairly well read, although of course, as a genre, you don't necessarily go off reading child-rearing magazines or maternity magazines unless you are pregnant or planning to become pregnant. You get it when you need information, which in fact, I think you could say is an issue with names, especially because in today's society, naming is very bureaucratic. You have to go to city office, you have to register it, you have to comply with the various rules and regulations there, and people don't know about these things. And even if they have some knowledge or their parents have some knowledge, it may not be 100% updated. So they need resources, and that's where these kind of magazines and guides come into play. So the Tamahio baby guides, there's a lot of them, but they have published in a bunch of different forms, and they emphasize reader participation. Most of the data that they get is through things like these little postcards that readers fill in, asking about, here it is on the bottom, you can fill out information like how many children do you have, what are their names, when were they born, and this is the data that they then use to create their databases. It's quite intense, actually. So they have columns on their magazines. They have a website that has a lot of ranked information, and specifically they have a guidebook that comes out about once every 2 years or so since 2003. In fact, the pace has increased recently. There's about 18 different editions at this moment. And this is the one that we're going to be looking at today. So what's interesting about these guides is they provide both advice and information about naming practices. So this is how you should do a name. This is how you should pick it out. This is how you can register it. And they also provide lists of names. So if you want to have the name Aiko, these are all the ways you can write Aiko, or these are different ways of choosing and making a new name. So what you can find that you can assume that these kind of guides are playing roles in dual fashion. First, they are obviously involved in the construction of child-rearing discourses, specifically regarding names, and also they are involved in the production and monitoring of change of names or changing names. child-rearing discourses in general, this probably don't have enough time to talk about that today, but, you know, how do people talk about practices? How do people talk about what it is to rear a child, or what is the goal of this activity? Is part of what people talk about, or is those images are shaped through these different resources? Tamago Club in particular, along with the Tamahoyo guides, has been kind of played up as a guide for modern or contemporary mothers, although it's rather conservative in a lot of other ways. But what you can find is that through the advice and information provided, it might influence people in a variety of ways, such as who should be involved in names, who should we ask for advice, who should we, you know, talk to about this. They do have comments about this specifically, and, you know, how should names in the particular question here, how should they reflect or not reflect gender? How much should we think about that? They also are involved in both reporting change and also creating change, in the sense of, especially in Japan, where there are no publicly available data sets from the government, people tend to be, when they want to do research on names, they have to use alternative sources. Tamahio ends up being one of those sources. You actually see a lot of academic research being conducted on the ranking data in particular, because that's much easier to get your hands on. So they publish this information, they collect data from readers, they publish it, readers read that. They obviously then think, maybe I should choose a name from this list. They report it, and then that becomes a part of the database. Of course, the point here is that Tamahio isn't reporting every single name. They are choosing names. It's not a comprehensive list. They are making decisions about which names they should present. So there is some discourse and some ideology behind how they're choosing this, presumably. This is just the amount of data they collect, but within recent years in particular, they have really increased the amount of data they collect about names every year. So I'm going to be looking at two particular parts of the guides. I'm going to focus on the original 2003 one and the 2023 edition. And I've been looking at two things within that. A qualitative analysis looking specifically at mentioning of gender in the advice and information. Do they talk about you should give a gendered name, or this is what a girl's name should be like? Anytime they made a mention of that, I made a memo of this. And then I also have done a quantitative analysis of the actual names that are listed in there, specifically focusing on the images in terms of what kind of semantic characteristics might we find are being listed for girls and for boys. Just to give a little bit of some background information, between 2020 2023, there actually haven't been that many changes. So the vast majority of the text is identical. The major differences to notice is that it's actually a little shorter now. And what is shorter about it is that it deleted almost all of the personalized reports. It had a lot of reports saying this is why we chose this name, or, you know, this is what we felt about the name after we gave it. That's all gone, which is kind of interesting since that was considered to be a characteristic of Tamahiro to begin with, but it's not there. You actually see more details about fortune telling, which I would love to talk about, but I can't talk about today. It's too much. So in some ways, the newer version is a more distant, editorized version, and in that sense, more professional, but less personal version of the guide. So looking at then what kind of advice and information do we see here? What kind of mentioning is there of gender? The text, I should say first and foremost, lists names by gender. It's an a priori category throughout everything. It has boys' names, girls' names. It lists by sound, by the number of strokes in the kanji. It lists the number of images used. And since 2013, it also includes for boys and girls in the subtitle. In the original version, it doesn't say anything about boys and girls on the title, but since a few years ago, since 2 years ago, it's actually at the top of the edition now. However, what is interesting to me, and I think should be interesting to everybody else, is that they generally avoid discussions of gender. They don't talk about it. You know, it's a almost 500-page book, and everything is divided by girls, boys, and yet they don't really talk about what is a girl's name, what is a boy's name. There's only really, I found 17 instances where the text explicitly discusses gender in names. And what you can kind of find from that is, in terms of what they're talking about, greater variety of kanji is available for boys, more hiragana and manyogana. Hiragana is a syllabary, manyogana is where it's a particular use of kanji where you're using it for sound only, very similar like you would use it as a syllabary. And then mentioning that girls change their name when they get married, and maybe you should be careful about that when you choose a name. And that's it. There is actually a section about gender-neutral names, but in general, there is not any other comments about gender throughout the text. The comments on gender-neutral names, I don't know, what do they have? So the first thing is that both editions include a list of 10 gender-neutral names. They introduce them as being popular within recent years. The actual list, though, I should say, is different between the two editions because they are using the ranked data from every year. What's interesting, though, is that they also have another section where they caution parents about names that cannot be clearly identified for gender. It doesn't necessarily say that you should take a name that is clearly gendered, but it tells you that it's something you should keep in mind, so that children are not misgendered or that you are aware that it might happen. And that's about all it says. There is an interesting thing I noticed, however, in how they talked about it, which is that they kind of step back and associate the assertion of preferences. In the 2003 edition, they used hedges when they talked about these kind of names are becoming popular. It appears, or things like that. And in the newer edition, they have removed that and they have just made it into a stronger assertion, and it's much more cautious in that sense. So you do see then that they seem to be open to gender-neutral names, but they're cautionary, and they don't really talk about what makes names gendered or not gendered. So does that mean that they don't care about gender, or that girls' names and boys' names are treated identically? And the answer is no, not at all, but it's also a bit more complicated. So then looking at the images expressed by the names in the list of kanji or names selected for specific images. So for example, they have a list of names in kanji that express summer, or a list of names and kanjis that express luckiness. That's what I'm going to be looking at here. And what you find is actually very interesting. In the 2003 edition, it appeared that Tamahiro made an effort to represent male and female names fairly equally. They had about, I think it was 55 categories or so of different images, and they were fairly equal across the board. And in fact, for the other lists of names as well, it was the exact same number of pages for boys and girls' names. The actual number of names was a little different for some other reasons, but they tried to make the pages the same. So that was kind of interesting, except that when you look at 2023, then is it the same? And the answer is no. For 2003, the images were fairly equal, and for 2023, you find that's not the case at all, and certain image categories are skewed towards particular genders. So this is the data from 2003, and as you can see, the only two categories that really have a very big difference or a big gap between the two genders is names that exceed the parents, or, you know, successful in life, and then strong, physically strong. These both had more male names suggested. But they tried to make female names. And I say this specifically for the next point, which is that if you look at the 2023, there are some images that had largely even numbers of names, such as abundance or artistic, auspicious, you know, lucky names, beloved. These were all ones where more or less the same number of girls' and boys' names were listed. There were a very small number of names or categories where they suggested more girls' names. if you were looking for a pattern, it seems that more seasonal images, so like summer or other things like that, spring, these seem to be somewhat more balanced. You could also see that in the previous slide for the even ones. And then the rest of them all had considerably more male names. So they pretty much stopped trying to make any kind of balance between the names at all. In particular, you can see a lot of these are very masculine, stereotyped things like courage or strong. And remember how exceed and strong, these ones were the only two ones that had a gap in the previous years. Well, exceed is not that different, but strong is now 0. They didn't even try to give any strong female names. So that's kind of interesting, except that, of course, the categories are not that clear. Why is autumn more masculine? Well, some of the things that come here are issues that, say, Ivona mentioned, which is there are other factors that come together when you choose the name, including sounds. So, for example, more animal names were listed for boys. So does that mean that more boys are more animalistic? You might want to say that, but it's probably not. There are probably two major issues here. One is that in the example specifically listed, many of the animal names suggested ended in the kanji for horse, which is read ma. And ma is commonly found at the end of many boys' names, but usually using different kanji. So here you're just seeing two different factors coming together. Ma can be, it's a horse, and it can be read the right way to make it sound like a boy's name. Not that boys love horses, although maybe they do. The other issue is that there are some constraints around using certain kanji for images within the limitations of things that make it sound gender appropriate. So for example, I looked back at the issue of names that express courage, which in the 2000 edition, they tried hard to list them. But what you notice is that in trying hard to list them, they listed many of them that had the same phonological form. So they had two versions of shorty, two versions of shiki. Sorry, this is not 3 versions of shorty, it's a different one, I'm sorry. And 3 versions of yuki. So the same ones repeated over and over again with using those particular kanji. That's what they ended up being available to have it sound female. So they obviously have an idea of what makes a name sound female as well, that seems to shape what they can then use to write it out. And what you do find is that in the 2023 version, there are many fewer names listed for girls that express courage, but they also have less repeats, or less repeats in terms of phonological forms. Where is this? Let me go here. Yeah. So then, is Tamahiro against gender-neutral names? Do they, are they seem kind of weird about that? And the answer is, I would actually say no. They actually are kind of happy about gender-neutral names in general. They don't seem to try to avoid it. If you do look at the whole list of names listed by phonological and matched kanji forms, completely matched phonological forms with the graphic forms are very uncommonly used for both boys and girls. But about 10% of all of the names were found as the phonological forms were used for both boys and girls. So obviously, it's the kanji. It's the way that people are writing the names that seems to make it seem male or female, because a lot of the phonological forms do overlap, and they don't seem to have a problem with that. However, for whatever reason, as we can see with the newer edition, they seem less welcome to showcasing them. They're more cautious in the description, and there's less overlap in the images. It may be the trend within the publisher to emphasize differences. They actually do have girls and boys guides that they came up with later. That might be part of what's going on here. They also have experienced some backlash because the trends that they were associated with in terms of naming, not about gender per se, have been highly criticized. So there might be some attempts to try to protect themselves or seem a little bit more conservative in respect to that. Let me get to the next one. The other thing I should say is that it seems initially like maybe there are more images available to boys because of the list when you look at it that way. And I'd actually say this is a little bit more complicated because if you do look at the other guides, like the guides just for girls or the guides just for boys, you see that there are other images that are available for girls and available for boys that they don't bother to try to include in the main list. So you might actually say, the strongly feminine versions like fruits, flowers, grasses, trees, they did not include in any of the co-ed versions, so to speak. These ones seem to be more inaccessible to boys. That might be why they're not included. I don't know for sure. Obviously, we need to figure out more what is the relationship between these image categories and names. That's what I hope to do next in the research. I don't really have a lot of time to talk about this, obviously, but one thing I should say at the end is that Tamahio might actually change their advice in the future because there are changes in the law that will be happening next year restricting how people use kanji to write names that goes against the advice that they have been given up until now. So that's something to look at in the future. Okay, so thank you very much. I appreciate everybody listening, and I'm sorry for speaking so fast. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Giancarla, very much for sharing your very interesting study with us. Now we are changing a little, but not too much. We are going to Mandarin Chinese, and we will listen to the talk of Li Pei-Si from University of Lorraine in France, and to the talk of Marc Alassonnière-Tan from the National